with the shortage of examiners around here, every time a check ride is lost to paperwork, it just puts more strain and stress on the system. So making sure that you show up with the proper paperwork and the proper credentials will help.
Pat, there may be no greater disappointment for any applicant than unsuccessfully completing a check ride without actually taking the check ride. And this takes me back to when I was prepping for my private check ride. Good friend of mine had a check ride, the same examiner the day before. And I thought, great, he'll fill me in on what these check rides look like, because I'm a total newbie. I've never gone on one before. And I saw him in the dispatch office, and he was not a happy guy. And I'm like, okay, I'll leave him alone. It turned out he was 1/10 of an hour short on cross-country time. You don't qualify, we can't take the ride. That's got to be crushing for the DPE too, because y'all want people to be successful. You have your checklist and there's things you have to do, but that's got to be tough on your side when somebody comes in and just doesn't meet the standard to even take the ride.
Yeah, and the thing is, Jamie, that's probably the easiest thing to avoid out of all of the potential pitfalls. That one is the easiest one. I had one a while back on the private pilot check ride. It says cross country. Well, the definition of cross country has got to be more than 50 miles, and it's actually in the regs. And this particular applicant came, and his long cross country, one of the legs was 50 miles exactly, and there was no way I could measure it in any way that I could defend to call it 50.1. And we tried multiple times. We tried to figure out how can we make this come out 50.1. And so we had a little bit of a conversation with the flight school and the flight instructor. Why are we cutting this so short when there was another airport 10 miles further down the road? So it is the easiest thing to avoid, and so.
Well, I think it's one of the things people don't know, and they don't really tell you this in flight school. Even the big flight schools, they often don't tell you. There's a section of the FARs that are definitions. You don't have to guess what's a cross country or what's night flight or what any of this stuff is. It's all written down. You just have to look it up.
Under the heading definitions.
And sometimes the challenge can be so small that you really do have to read the regulations, because they are not written by Vonnegut and Steinbeck. I mean, they're written by administrators. And sometimes that difference, that confusing factor, is so small you can skip over it like it's nothing. And Pat, I know we've talked about this privately. For those going for a commercial check ride, because the requirements ratchet up as you go higher up the ladder, it becomes more specific. 61-129 for commercial pilots has a really interesting thing. I believe it's subset 4. The word "or" makes all the difference. And if you don't pay attention to that regulation, and then it says "or," whether you're a CFI working with an applicant or you're the applicant who's hopeful going off the check ride, you might have a real problem.
Yeah, there's actually 2 sections of 61-129, which most people agree is a horribly written reg. But the one that you're referring to, and there's another one we'll talk about in a few minutes, is the one that says, and by the way, that's 61-129A4. And it says 10 hours of solo flight time in a single engine airplane, or 10 hours of flight time performing the duties of pilot in command in a single engine airplane with an authorized instructor on board. Or is the key word there. So that 10 hours has to be either solo, and I'm for real solo, or perform the duties of pilot command. And here's where it gets you. If you go a little bit further down, it talks about one cross-country flight of not less than 300 nautical miles total distance, with landings at a minimum of 3 points, one of which is a straight line distance of at least 250 nautical miles from the original departure point. And then also 5 hours of night VFR conditions with 10 takeoffs and landings, each landing involving a flight in the traffic pattern at an airport with an operating control tower. So if you're going to do that 300-mile cross country solo, I mean, for real, you're by yourself in the airplane, then that 5 hours of night has to be solo, for real solo. You're the only one in the airplane. It can't be one can't be with the instructor and one solo because the reg doesn't say or a combination thereof. It says this or that. So I can't tell you the number of times that I have unfortunately had to tell someone um, this doesn't work. And the other gotcha is that once again it says solo. Solo doesn't mean having your buddy in the airplane to keep you company.
Mhm.
And that actually happened here here in Houston several years ago. There was a guy working towards this commercial. It wasn't one of mine. Working towards this commercial certificate and took an arrow and flew up to Tyler, Texas, and I did some other flying and came back, ran out of gas and crashed in a neighborhood.
Oh,
Survived. He survived. If that wasn't bad enough, though, he had a passenger with him on his commercial 300-mile flight, but just a buddy to come along to keep him company. Well, that's not solo. So when I'm doing a check ride and I see that they've got a long cross country and it's marked as solo, I kind of look at them and say, okay, now this is you were by yourself in the airplane, right? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Most of the time the answer is yes, but there's been a time or two when the answer has been, well, I had, you mean my wife couldn't come with me, or something, or my husband, or my whatever, my buddy. No, solo means by yourself in the airplane. So that or is a real gotcha, and I'll bet you just about every DPE meeting we have with the local FISDO, we have a mandatory meeting every year. Just about every 61, 129 comes up in one form or another. But that's a really big one. That 300-mile deal has to be solo or with the flight instructor. Now, here's the other potential gotcha. If that flight instructor signs your logbook as dual received,
I was going to ask about this because you can't be PIC and dual at the same time. Or am I wrong?
well, well,
I'm
if
sorry, you
you're
can't be solo and dual at the same time.
Yes, that's the key. That's the key. So if when you're logging this 300 miles in this 5 hours, if you have a flight instructor on board, then you have to log it PIC
Mhm.
time. You can't log it solo time. If you're by yourself, obviously it's solo time, and I mean for real by yourself, it's solo time. Um, Now, the instructor can sign the logbook, which more or less attests that he was on board, or she, but it can't be logged as dual received on the applicant side because obviously that's it's dual. So, and this is supposed to be performing the duties of pilot in command. So if you're calling it dual, it can't be counted as PIC time. So for the purpose of this particular reg, so this really has a potential, a big potential gotcha. Most of the schools all of the schools that I do check rides for on a regular basis, um, they know this because I have beat it into them that they can't do this, and so fortunately that hasn't happened too much. Now where I run into it is when I get an applicant that maybe that an independent flight instructor is signed off, or somebody at some school I haven't um, done much with, but I do everything I can up in advance to let them know, hey, this is a potential gotcha. Make sure that it's logged correctly, but still, it will happen
I
occasionally.
wish when the FAA did the revisions, they would take note of this because it's not the first time they've heard that this is an issue either.
No,
And make that or
no,
bold type, underlined, italicized, make it really clear there's something there. And because there are so many variables, and I will tell you, talking about the cross country requirement for commercial, I always thought I got lucky because I did my flight training in Florida. First of all, I love it here. Best place on the planet, proven by science. But I flew to Key West for my commercial cross country. It was a popular place to go. First of all, it's Key West. Come on. But it
Yeah.
met the requirement. But of course, that also means back in the old days, pre GPS and all, my navigation was cakewalk. Fly out to the East Coast, request at or below 500, which you can do on flight following here, and fly all the way until the world ends and it's just water. Oh, that's where you go. It's not the most complicated thing in the world. Now, there were other issues. I did have a complete electrical failure coming out of Key West and got to spend some extra time there while I waited for parts to be delivered. But, there's
Yeah.
all these variables that not just the applicant, not just the CFI, but the DPE too, they all have to kind of agree we've met the requirements before we can go on with the check ride. And that's maybe one of the steps where the applicants got a relatively high level of ignorance on this, not making fun of them. That was my case too. The CFI may also have a relatively high level of ignorance because they haven't been doing this for 20 years in most cases. They've been doing it for a few months, maybe a year. This might be their first commercial sign off, and they don't know
Yeah.
to catch this. And that goes to another part of 61-129 when we get to the flying with a hood or foggles.
Oh boy.
That's a big issue too. And man, you miss these, you get to pay for the ride, but you don't get to go on the ride.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's again. I'm reading straight from the regs now. Uh, this is 61-129A3I. And it says 10 hours of instrument training using a view limiting device, including attitude instrument flying, partial panel skills, recovery from unusual flight attitudes, and intercepting and tracking navigational systems. 5 hours of the 10 hours on instrument training must be in a single engine airplane. So here's the deal. There have been numerous interpretations, starting with the Therault interpretation. And now he was asking specifically about helicopters, but with regard to this reg, I think he was talking about C3I, but the FAA was quick to say this applies to all of the instrument requirements across the board in 61-129. Followed by the Platt interpretation, and then another one that was the Hartzell interpretation. That's your friend and
Christine.
mine, Christine Hartzell from
Yeah.
AOPA, asked for this interpretation a number of years ago to clarify. And I'm going to read from the pertinent part of the Hartzell interpretation. Let's see here. They're referring back to the previous interpretations. The interpretation dispels the notion that holding an instrument rating is on its own sufficient evidence that the applicant has fulfilled the aeronautical experience requirements for a commercial certificate under 61-129. However, we anticipate that for commercial pilot applicants who already hold an instrument rating, the hours of instrument training used to obtain that rating will meet at least some, if not most or quite often, meet all the requirements for instrument aeronautical experience as required under 61-129. And then in the following paragraph, we are merely clarifying the requirement that an applicant for a commercial pilot certificate provide evidence that they have met the requirements of 61-129. Now, this is where the problem comes in. If an applicant shows up with a commercial check ride, that's great. But I have to look now at every single logbook entry for that applicant's instrument rating training, looking specifically for attitude instrument flying, partial panel skills, recovery from unusual flight attitudes, and intercepting and tracking navigational systems. Those are the words that I have to look for. So Wouldn't it be easier? And this is what I've told the schools that I deal with so much, and it's on my website too. Wouldn't it be easier if in the instrument training you simply included in the comments section of the logbook, um, this training was conducted in accordance with 61.129A3I. That that takes care of the problem entirely.
It relieves some of the pressure on the CFI. It gives them something that they can put in the logbook that actually meets the standard. It reduces the stress on the applicant because they're like, okay, I'm good to go now. My instructor understands this. And it reduces the stress on the DPE because you're not going through 250 hours of flights to see what's there.
Well, it's not 250 hours of flights, but it certainly is at least 40. Um, because that's the requirement for an instrument rating. So it's going to be at least
Mhm.
40. Well, at least 15 because 15 hours dual required for an instrument rating, 40 hours under the hood, but 15 of that has to be dual.
But you got to weed your way through every entry in there to find those.
That's the point. Yeah, that's the point. So, and I can't speak for other examiners, but if the instructor that provided the instrument training somewhere in the back of the logbook, let's say, said, I certify that the instrument training provided to John Smith between the dates of this and that conform with the requirements of 61.129A3I with the use of a view limiting device. Personally, I would accept that because it's a logbook entry in a legal document that and if you commit fraud in a legal document like that, well, there's consequences. So if they put that in there, I'm perfectly happy taking that and running with it. But I can tell you that one has been an issue. Um, the other one, and this can be an issue with private, but I've run into it specifically with commercial recently, as a matter of fact, was the cross country requirements. 1 2 hour cross country in a single engine airplane in daytime conditions that consists of a total straight line distance of more than 100 nautical miles from the original point of departure, and 1 2 hour cross country flight in a single engine airplane in nighttime conditions that consists of a total straight line distance of more than 100 nautical miles from the original point of departure. And I had one recently with a gentleman that had counted some dual SIC time in a citation.
Second in command in a citation, he's counting that.
Thank you. Second in command in a citation, calling that instruction on a cross country for the night or the day, well, the day or the night, I don't remember which one, but it can't be single engine airplane. Citation is not a
Mm-hmm.
single engine airplane. So, so that was, I mean, I looked at that one, I couldn't believe that because three different instructors had looked at that entry and obviously just had not looked at the regs and read the words. The regs are not always clear. We've talked about that. We did a previous episode on interpretations and things like that, and it wouldn't interpretations wouldn't be necessary if the regs were
That's
crystal
true,
clear.
but CFIs are just people, and I mean,
Yeah.
notwithstanding you and I, who are obviously remarkable examples of the trade, but they're just people, and very often they get caught up in the workaday world, and they've got things going on, and they're checking somebody's logbook. They're looking at totals. They're not looking at the components that make up the total. And unfortunately, the way the
Yeah.
regs are written, those components are really important. It can't just be you hit the number. You have to hit the number in a certain way.
Right.
And, I
Yeah.
want to ask you one other thing before we close out on this, because I don't want to kill people. But we talked earlier about my error of saying PIC in dual. It's solo in dual. Can you log solo time and PIC time on the same line, on the same flight, or does it have to be one or the other?
No, it can be both. It can be both. You're by yourself in the airplane. Well, who's PIC? You are. There's not autopilot in the right seat from airplane. There's not autopilot there. So no, you're the PIC. You're also solo. So yes, you can log both of
I
those.
think that's where people get into a jam. Applicants and CFIs. What's solo? What's dual? What's PIC? And because of these various components that make up our total time, understanding what that is really important, I think. And I thank you for providing clarification. That might be the great benefit of this. Knowing to look for the word or, really drill in on what are these requirements, because as you are well aware, when I go to a check ride, I have a rental fee on the aircraft. I have a fee for the DPE. I'm going to be spending a significant amount of money today. Plus, I'm under self-induced stress that I want to do well. I want to have everything going in my favor so this works out well. And at least walking into your office to plunk down my paperwork with the knowledge, I have a score that's acceptable on my knowledge test. I have all the requirements written down. I know I meet everything. Now we can get down to the nuts and bolts of doing the ride. That's a whole different thing than going in and finding out, like my buddy did years ago, oh, I'm short on time. That's really deflating and
Yeah.
expensive.
And as I said earlier at the top of this thing, it's the easiest thing to avoid.
Yeah, because you're on the ground. You get time to review
Easiest
it.
thing.
Let's look through. And hopefully, we've helped some people here, Pat. I hope this episode results in at least several more successful completions of check rides rather than, I'm sorry, your paperwork's incomplete. And I don't mean to laugh, but it's just one of
Yeah,
those things. It just breaks your heart that people are going to the ride and through I can't say of no fault of anybody's, because it is someone's responsibility, but
it is.
they just don't even get past go, and that's just crushing. So thanks for
And
going over this topic.
well, and keep in mind too that with the with the shortage of examiners around here, every time a check ride is lost to paperwork, it just puts more strain and stress on the system. So, making sure that you show up with the proper paperwork and the proper credentials will help.
Darn right. Well, hey, viewer, if you've made it this far, and I hope you have, because this was valuable stuff. Pat Brown, huge brain, reference library, the size of the Taj Mahal. It's just incredible. But please click like on this video, share it on social media so all your friends know this stuff too, and subscribe to the channel, because Pat and I will miss you if we don't see you next time. And until next time, I'll see you later, Pat Brown.
Adios, my friend.